we're in a peculiar state of affairs, an alarming state of affairs, in which we have an ongoing constitutional violation in the form of the current head of the executive branch.
It's a state of emergency. I'm Jessica Denson, and this is Lights On. We are dealing with an unconstitutional, illegal presidency that is giving a joint address to Congress tonight. There are steps that this Congress could be taking to acknowledge the illegality of Donald Trump's administration under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. He remains a disqualified insurrectionist. My guest today is the author of the original meaning of the 14th Amendment. He's been a guest on Lights On before. I'm so happy to have him back. Professor Evan Bernick of Northern Illinois University. Welcome back to Lights On.
Thank you, Jessica. I wish it were under better circumstances.
Me too, my friend. Me too. Now, just to preface, give our viewers a little bit of a tease here. You have quite a scandal going on with the former co-author of your book, The Original Meaning of the 14th Amendment, and you just released a law review piece called Birthright, Citizenship, and the Dunning School of Unoriginal Meanings. And we're definitely going to get to that in a few minutes. Before we do that, I just want to talk to you, Evan. We got to know each other discussing the continuing disqualification of Donald Trump prior to his swearing in, prior to the certification of his electors on January 6th. And you explained so clearly to our audience, as did other constitutional scholars, why Congress could have objected to his presidency because he remains disqualified for what he did 4 years ago. Now, this is the beauty of it. And you and I had a conversation about this the other day. This is an issue that could still be raised. Any member of Congress could be bringing this conversation to the forefront by raising an amnesty bill and discussing why Trump remains disqualified. Can you kind of explain that?
Sure. Donald Trump is no more eligible to hold the office of the presidency than a hypothetical 25-year-old who was somehow able to win an electoral college majority. Section 3 of the 14th Amendment disqualifies insurrectionists from holding any office under the United States. The presidency is an office under the United States, and Donald Trump participated in an insurrection against the United States. It's that straightforward, except it's not, of course, because he was able to win an electoral college majority. And we're in a peculiar state of affairs, an alarming state of affairs, in which we have an ongoing constitutional violation in the form of the current head of the executive branch. And I would go even further than you just did, Jessica, in talking about what legislators could do. I would say that they are constitutionally obliged to do, in virtue of the oath that they take to the Constitution, to do anything possible within the institutional powers that they have, up to and including enacting legislation that specifically puts in issue the question of whether he is constitutionally capable of holding office, which he isn't, or calling for his impeachment.
Yeah, we have discussed that at length on this program, Evan, because I believe, and many American citizens and other advocates from organizations like Free Speech for People, that he has committed a multitude of impeachable offenses from day one. We should be normalizing this conversation. We have an absolute coup going on in our federal government with the actions of Elon Musk, Donald Trump, and his vice president, J.D. Vance. Now, you talked about new legislation, but that's not really necessary if we're talking about the Section 3 conversation, is it? Because Donald Trump is currently disqualified. The only mechanism per the pure language of Section 3 to remove that disqualification is by a 2/3 amnesty vote. And by merely raising this is what gets me, Evan, is that any one of these Democratic lawmakers could simply acknowledge it. Just verbalize it, talk about it, walk out of the State of the Union and have a press conference on why Donald Trump is a constitutionally illegitimate president. And that would establish in the public discourse his illegitimacy and require the need for amnesty to clear him of that disqualification.
Yes, that's a very important distinction. In talking about Section 3 enforcement by Congress, we are not talking, or we shouldn't be talking, as if Congress needs to do something before Section 3 kicks in, and we can say that we have an unconstitutional executive. Instead, the point of raising an amnesty bill is to draw attention to the fact that in order to have an insurrectionist hold any office under the United States, you need a two-thirds majority of Congress to say, yes, we're okay with this. So an amnesty bill isn't about saying that Donald Trump now, in virtue of what Congress has just done, is not constitutionally eligible for the office. It's designed to draw attention to the fact that he is currently violating the Constitution by being in office, and Congress would have to do something in order to change that. Now, realistically, two-thirds majority of Congress, not going to be easy to come by. However, talking about realism, what is it legally possible to do, institutionally possible
but that's in our favor. Just to clarify, two-thirds being hard to come by is in the favor of the Constitution, right? Because you're not going to get that very high threshold to remove the disqualification.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
So really failure on any level is a success.
Failure on any level is a success because it keeps us talking about the fact that we have an unconstitutional person at the head of the executive branch.
So this is something that the Democrats could be doing right now. And if we can kind of just bring this out of the academic discussion and to real life and what these politicians, these people who seem to be, especially on the Democratic side, so prone to playing by the rules when the other side is just throwing the rule book out the window and setting everything on fire. Can you just give me your sense, both as a constitutional scholar and just as someone who is living as we're literally seeing democracy going up in flames, on what these politicians should be thinking about what's acceptable and what's normal to do right now along these lines?
Right now, the executive branch is not only pushing the boundaries of the legally possible, it is running roughshod over them as quickly and, if we can call it, creatively as it can, as fast as it can.
Maybe deviously, huh?
Yes, deviously, right. Mm-hmm. If we are not prepared to respond in kind, if we are not prepared to get creative, to do things that at first blush you may think, well, Section 3 enforcement, he's already in office. What are we supposed to do about that? We risk closing ourselves off of a number of options that, yes, they have a low probability of working, but they don't put us in the position of just accepting a continuously lawless state of affairs as normal. Every opportunity we have to say, no, they can't do this. Constitutionally, it is illegitimate for them to do this, that we can think of, we've got to seize on. We've got to take advantage of. Because we know that they are trying on the other side to think of any devious means that they can to legitimize themselves.
Professor Bernick, they absolutely are. And I want to get to, speaking of any ways to legitimize themselves, something that your former colleague, former co-author of the original meaning of the 14th Amendment, Randy Barnett, has recently done. Now, you informed me of this the other day. You put on my radar an op-ed that he wrote called "Trump Might Have a Case on Birthright Citizenship." It's really extraordinary. He literally put out a piece in the New York Times, an op-ed with a co-author, Ilan Werman, arguing that Trump could be right on the issue of birthright citizenship. Now, you just released a law review in the Cornell Law Review called "Birthright Citizenship and the Dunning School of Unoriginal Meanings." And you go through in this piece just how outrageous your former colleague's contention that birthright citizenship does not extend to children of non-citizens in this country is. And I just want to quote for it before I let you take off. You say in this law review that Barnett and Werman's approach, your former colleague and his co-author, which attempts to radically redefine the historical understanding of citizenship, is methodologically flawed and undermines core principles of constitutional law. Your critique exposes the inaccuracies and inconsistencies in their position and scrutinizes the scholarly merit of new theories of birthright citizenship that are wildly inconsistent with constitutional text, history, precedent, and unbroken tradition. The essay concludes by examining the professional responsibility of legal scholars to engage in rigorous, fact-based historical analysis rather than politically motivated reinterpretations that threaten to destabilize fundamental constitutional rights. Now, this is quite a scandal. I'm going to let you take over. I've talked enough. You tell us what's going on here.
So this is a really difficult place for me to be in. It's a very uncomfortable place for me to be in. Randy Barnett is not just a co-author or a colleague of mine. He was a mentor, and he is, I would still say, a friend. We wrote a book together. That book was dedicated to the proposition that you search out the original meaning of the 14th Amendment, the meaning that the 14th Amendment communicated to members of the public at the time it was ratified, and you accept the consequences of that for the purposes of what the law is today. Even if it doesn't work with your policy preferences, even if you might like the original meaning to be something different, something better from your political perspective, you own the consequences of original public meaning. And the reason that this is uncomfortable, and the reason that I wrote what I had to do, what I wrote, was because I felt I had to write it in response to an op-ed written by a former co-author that was entirely inconsistent with the methodological principles that we were committed to at the time that we wrote the book. In support of the proposition that millions of children can be rendered stateless by the unilateral actions of the executive branch, Randy and Alon appeal to original public meaning and provide not one scintilla of evidence in support of the proposition that anybody in 1868 understood birthright citizenship, the idea that if you're born in the United States and you can be subjected to the laws of the United States, you can be arrested, detained, deported, prosecuted, and as the Trump administration is now proposing, executed for capital crimes. You are a citizen of the United States. There are no exceptions for situations that the children of undocumented immigrants find themselves in. There are a limited set of historically rooted exceptions, all of which concern obligations that are encoded in treaties with other nations, or a practical inability on the part of the United States government to subject you to its power. None of those exceptions remotely resemble the ones that this op-ed, by supporting the executive order purporting to eliminate birthright citizenship, is effectively saying might have a constitutional case. And so I wrote this, just systematically going through the claims that Rand and Alon make in that article and saying there is a broad existing literature that goes into the public debates that Republicans had about the meaning of the Citizenship Clause, that goes into the abolitionist history, the fight by abolitionists to entrench birthright citizenship as a constitutional principle to ensure that the children of formerly enslaved people who obviously didn't consent to the authority of the United States, they were forced into this country. Historians, scholars have looked through this evidence, sifted it, examined it, presented it, and Randy and Alon effectively disregarded it. They promise that someday, somehow, some way, they will write an article that will conclusively establish that the conventional wisdom is wrong. But until then, they haven't put up. And if the tone of the article comes off as strong, well, it's because it is. Because given the stakes, under the circumstances, if you don't have evidence, I think you're obliged to shut up.
Well, you said the tone of your article is strong, and I think that it's hardly strong considering the circumstances. This kind of goes to the theme that we were just picking up on for Section 3 and the kind of action that's required, because you have to counter what seems to be, if they're grasping at straws and there's no originalist argument or historical merit to their case. Are they doing this for power? Why do you think your former colleague and mentor would be abandoning what is known to be the intent of Section 1 of the 14th Amendment right now?
Jessica, I will say to you what I have said to everybody who asked that question of me. I don't know, and at this point, I don't care. The consequences of what they are doing and the degree to which they have deviated from their expressed methodological principles is so significant that even if, they have the intentions of angels, they're just really trying to find what the truth of the matter is. They are doing it so recklessly and with such disregard of what other scholars have brought to bear for decades. And the consequences of what this would mean for the effect of one of the crowning achievements of our democracy, this principle of non-domination that is encoded in the 14th Amendment. It prevents precisely the kind of arbitrary, unaccountable power that this regime is now trying to create over millions of stateless people. I don't cast doubt on their intentions. I don't know what they are. I don't assume that they are good. I don't assume that they are evil. I do know that they are wrong, that they are obviously wrong, and that before they publish this op-ed, they should have presented their claims and their evidence to other scholars. They should have communicated with people who studied this stuff well in advance of any litigation, because that's when they seem to have started doing this. And so the harshness of the tone is a function of that, not because I think that they are bad people, but because I think that good people can do a hell of a lot of harm if they are not careful, and they have not been careful.
Well, just to zoom out, Professor Bernick, we have seen so many people abandon what seems to be common sense, common morals, common decency, law and order, rule of law, for this groveling to power, to get close to power, to survive in an authoritarian takeover of the United States of America and try to legitimize it. One thing I want to point out to our viewers is that your article names the Dunning School of unoriginal meanings. And just for people to understand where that name comes from, it's named after, as you described, William Archibald Dunning. Dunning, you say, along with the founder of the modern American political science discipline, John W. Burgess, trained multiple historians at Columbia University on questions involving the history of Reconstruction. Dunning and his students were notorious for writing narratives and interpretations of Reconstruction that blamed Reconstruction's failures on the quality of Black leadership and attributed the expansion of Black political power more to Northern vindictiveness than to a moral right that emanated from the Union victory. So really, I mean, you are hearkening back to historical references of attempts to rewrite history. And God knows this illegal Trump administration is trying to rewrite history. Can you explain how that plays into this?
Yes. So William Dunning and the leaders of the Dunning School more generally, I think could be fairly, I would be obliged to fairly describe them as motivated by a desire to undermine, discredit Reconstruction, the effort to build biracial democracy in the wake of the Civil War. And they distorted history in the service of their desire to make biracial democracy impossible. they were bad guys. But the broader point that we are trying to make with that article is not just to accuse Alon and Randy of bad motivations. There were people who came up in the Dunning School who may not have been motivated by any animosity, not specifically. They just took certain assumptions for granted because they felt that they had to in order to operate within an academic environment in which there were certain things that were just taken for granted, that were accepted to be normal. And what we are rejecting is an effort to normalize scholarship like this and pass it off as history, because it's not. And the Dunning School's efforts to undermine Reconstruction, I think, can usefully be analogized to at least the consequences of what would be the case were academic efforts to discredit birthright citizenship to prevail. You would gut something that was foundational to Reconstruction, an expression of one of our greatest constitutional movements to entrench birthright citizenship, to ensure that the children of formerly enslaved people would not be stateless, that they would be protected. To attack birthright citizenship is to attempt to erase that history. And if there's one constant among authoritarian regimes, it is an effort to erase history. Randy and Alon may not be motivated by the same things as the Trump administration, but the Trump administration is doing something very deliberate. It is doing something that is as morally evil as what the Dunning School did, and it is doing so with a great deal of muscle, with executive power. They are trying to rewrite history. They are trying to make our nation worse by drawing out the worst parts of our history and amplifying specifically them and erasing others. If you are trying to say that this executive order has a case before the Supreme Court without any evidence in support of your claims about original meaning, you are helping people who want to erase history. And the harshness of the tone, again, is not a function of us specifically saying Alon and Randy are bad people, but they are helping bad people.
No apology is necessary here on Lights On. I highly encourage that reading the full article, and I will put the link to it into the description of this video so our viewers can read it. And by the way, you're joined in it by co-authors Anthony Michael Kreis from Georgia State University College of Law and Paul Gowder of Northwestern University Pritzker School of Law. It's an excellent piece, very easy to understand and follow. It really brings in the historical perspective and why it's so egregious what is being attempted right now. I just want to bring in, if you don't mind, what we have been organizing. Now, you and I got to know each other, as I mentioned earlier, over the conversation about Section 3, which on Lights On this show gave birth to a grassroots effort called 14th Now. And we attempted to pressure Congress peacefully to block Trump certification in early January. That movement has now become Now DC. We are staging another historic protest in the nation's capital on March 14th, symbolizes Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. We believe that absolute immediate action, Evan, must be taken against this lawless presidency, that we must stand up for our Constitution now, that we do not have time to waste or time to see how things play out over the next 2 or 4 years. Can you just kind of bring us full circle? I know you gave us your thoughts on what Congress can do, but can you give us your sense of the need for immediacy and immediate action in this moment?
Every second that we accept this as normal, as something that it's happening in the background, we can just mostly go about our lives, is a second in which we're playing into the hands of people who want to harm us. And every small thing that you can do, preferably it's not small, it's coordinated, because unless you work together with others, not only will you feel lonely and ineffectual, but you will be lonely and ineffectual. All of this needs to be coordinated. But just be confident that they're not as powerful as they think they are. They never are. The most reactionary forces in United States history have only been able to accumulate the power that they have because people have, even implicitly, even quietly, have accepted this as inevitable. We are at a very early stage. And if we're not saying it's inevitable, if we're gathering together, if we're protesting, if we're making use of any avenue we can legally to challenge this regime, we're doing something good. We're sapping them of power.
Yeah, absolutely. Professor Bernick, I feel like I'm alternating. I want to call you Professor Bernick because your scholarship and contribution to this is so vital right now. All of the constitutional scholars that I have had the honor and privilege of platforming on Lights On, I'm so grateful that I do it here on this show, but I wish that every media outlet was talking about your understanding and knowledge of the foundation of this country. I mean, without our Constitution, we do not have freedom. We do not have rights. If we abandon it and abandon the threshold issues, especially, we have no hope. We have to hearken back to this. This is not an academic discussion. It is a discussion about life and what our very freedom. So I'm really grateful to have you, as always, on Lights On. Thank you so much for joining me. And I thank you for your courage and clarity in this recent article. It's really, really important, and I applaud you for that.
And thank you for yours, Jessica. It means a lot to me that you would say that, and Evan is fine.
Yeah. Okay, Evan. Well, thank you so much for joining us today on Lights On. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Please find everything Lights On at thejessicadenson.com and do us a favor and subscribe to the Jessica Denson YouTube channel where you're watching this video. If you haven't already, go to nowmarch.org. Nowmarch.org. Make your plans to join us in Washington, D.C. on March 14th. We need to change the course of history on that day. Take back our power. Claim it. As Evan was telling us, we have the power to do. It is enshrined in our Constitution. It is a divine and a human right. So please join us in Washington, D.C. on March 14th. As always, have a beautiful day and let your light shine.